Hey guys, Veronica here. So we have a lot of ground to cover today, but I just wanted to mention before we get started with your questions and updates on what's going on in the Big Sur garden that I'm actually going to be on the road again here shortly. I know that the timing seems terrible, but for me it makes a lot of sense. So one of the things I've noticed this week, and I've gone down the mountain twice now to upload videos in isolated spaces where I can, grab some Wi-Fi here and there. And one of the things that I've noticed is that I'm getting probably about 10 times the amount of questions related to gardening that I typically would. And I feel like being in total isolation, being off-grid, kind of does us all a disservice. And if there's an opportunity for more of us to learn how to grow our own food and to do it in a way that is better for the earth, then I need to make myself a little more available, I guess, was sort of the conclusion that I came to. So by the time you see this, I will already have relocated to my new location. I am planning on coming back to Big Sur and checking in on these gardens every so often just to give you progress updates, just like I'm planning on doing it in Texas as well. It just kind of depends on the state of the world and the state of travel and how far I'm able to travel. But in the meantime, I feel like this place is in a pretty good space. We're going to go over sort of like what's in the ground, what we have to look forward to. And then I also feel like if I can go to another space and help more people grow more food, then that's what makes the most sense to me right now and also be available for you guys. So walking around the garden, first off, one of the big things that I decided to do it a week ago, but just made the move yesterday or the day before, was the Krakty cucumber that was up on the kitchen counter here behind me before. He was just looking really sad. I noticed there was a lot of root shedding happening, that the root mass that was growing through the hole in the pot was a lot smaller than it had been prior, and that a lot of fruit was falling off, a lot of leaves were falling off. It was really struggling. So I decided to give it a shot. It went out to the raised beds, and that's where it's going to live until it produces or dies, along with its cohorts that have been living outside this entire time. And, they're a little bit worse for the wear looking, but we'll see. We'll see who survives. So that's that. That was the cucumber. I'm going to be glancing down at a list I have taped to the tripod because there's really a lot to cover today. Moving through the yard. So there's the tree that's in the middle of this rock garden that I've kind of been admiring based on the way it's pruned. I'm starting to think it might actually be an elderberry, which would be great because now you have medicinal crops. In addition to like the wild herbs and stuff here, you have, a really powerful medicinal crop that's growing on the property. There's a few others that are coming up here and there, but that one, the flowers on it look really great. I started kind of landscaping around that space, and so there's violas, which are edible flowers, as well as a type of wood violet that's also an edible flower. There's mint. I planted these Mexican gherkins next to my favorite tree in hopes that it'll grow up the branches. I love this tree. It's some type of mimosa or something, I think. But I love it because it doesn't look like it's connected to the ground, so it's like it fell over, but then it's growing, and like the stump is out here anyway. Yeah, it's a really cool tree. But we'll see if those gherkins take off. That felt like a good spot for them. The violas and mint have been doing well in this area, so I added more because it gets a little bit of shade. And as the heats up and summer shows up, then maybe it'll survive, any drought periods. Moving towards the end of the rock garden that I typically show in like opening or closing shots. There's a couple of strawberries here and there. One that I just transplanted that it's been in a pot, one that was transplanted out there as a root that's doing well. The gophers ate everything else. I'm trying to work with sort of like the rock ledges where the gophers can't get through, and plant into those spaces so that the roots can kind of navigate their way down between the rocks, but it's not, totally exposed to soil-dwelling animals. So we'll see how that goes. In this space also, you'll see that there's a lot of weeds kind of laying between the rocks with sprouts coming out. That's totally intentional. So what I do is I'll pull all of the weeds in that space and set them off to the side. And anything that doesn't have seeds and has, like a decent amount of mass, specifically grass usually, that I'll take and I'll just use it as mulch. After I plant my seeds, I'll do my broadcast mix, and then I just lay those weeds right back on top, kind of try to disperse them evenly. One of the things that happens is I see birds pecking my seeds out a little bit less. The other is that when it rains or when you water, that weed layer will help to create sort of a moisture retention mulch for all of those germinating seeds underneath. So you don't have them drying out as quickly, you have a higher rate of germination. There's gonna be a crazy amount of like mustard and mint and wildflowers and arugula, and I don't remember what else I put in that mix in that particular spot. Lower growing herbs mostly. But yeah, so we'll see, how that comes up, how that progresses. I'm really looking forward to all of like the rock stuff working out better than anticipated, just based on the stuff that I planted back in like December and January, starting to really, you can tell when a plant gets, it's like its roots are taking a hold of the space, because it just like the leaf spread looks different. I'll figure out a better way to explain this at some point. But right now, like just take my word for it that you can see from when you plant to when it's actually like in the soil making moves. Like there's a visual difference that happens. But one of the things that I'm doing on that rock wall, where I've put, various herbs and greens and stuff, a combination of transplants and direct sow, is that I'll leave the weeds in certain places for soil retention until the plants around them start to grow. And if I'm not leaving the weeds in that spot and I want to plant something there, then I'll use those weeds for mulch. Again, like I did in the other rock space, just to give it a little more coverage. If you have a big rain event, if you have a lot of wind, anything that's going to disturb that top layer of soil, like having it mulched with something that's a little bit heavier than, your compost and all of like the stuff that might blow away in the wind or wash away in the rain, that mulch helps to slow down either weather pressure, whether it's wind or rain, or even freezing cold, to be honest. Like it helps insulate it too, but it helps to slow down the rain so that it can actually, find points of infiltration instead of washing away your entire garden. So something to think about. It's not, aesthetically pleasing all the time, but I don't mind it being a little bit messy for a while if it means that something's going to grow. So just something to think about. For the Bokashi bin, I know it's only been a week. We're not going to see the 2-week marker at this point because I have to make moves sooner than later. But as you can see, the mycelium is starting to kind of spawn out in every direction and just break down stuff. A really nice white fuzzy mass. I'm very excited about that. That's how you know that this Bokashi compost that's been fermenting is actually working and kind of growing out into the soil. And so I'll leave instructions for that with one of the neighbors here, probably the gardener that you noticed in the background of one of my videos once. She's pretty much the caretaker of this mountain and is very energized now that I've come in and, started stuff going in all of these experiments. And it's sort of the way that her brain works as well in terms of like experimenting with planting and whatnot. And so having that sort of encouragement and permission, watching somebody else do it, I guess, is enough to get someone like going. So that's cool. Very excited about that. Very excited to check back in and see what's going on. In the cover crop bed, we're starting to see now some cover crops popping up in the spots that were bare. I have also squeezed in some potato, what are they called? Potato chits? I think it's chits. So it's just chopped up pieces of potato that were already sprouting, at least an eye in each piece. I let them dry for a day or two because that's the way I learned how to do it, and then stuck them in the soil. We'll see how many take, but I decided getting more potatoes in the ground was a really good idea because if what's going on right now does become like a food situation, or if they get super isolated up here, then at least you have a higher calorie vegetable to put into your rotation. You're not just eating, like arugula and greens all day. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but sometimes it's nice, potatoes are a good survival food. So got some potatoes in that bed. Favas are coming up and looking great. As you can see, even though I tried not to overseed, it still feels a little bit crowded to me in the areas where these plants are developing already. So I might scale back the seeds a little. I think that you can always kind of underestimate the amount you need, not severely, but like maybe a little bit less than I do. And then always go in and fill it in later, kind of like I did when we noticed that the birds had eaten pieces of it and that some had washed off, or maybe there were areas that had too much ash still. Like, I wasn't entirely sure what was going on with those portions of soil because I didn't test them, but it gave me a spot to bury Bokashi, so that's all that mattered at that point. A weird little project I have going on, and I know this is going to drive you guys crazy because you're going to be like, when's the next update on these things? But I'd rather kind of share it and put it out there than worry about, the timeline, and we'll get back to everything. Like, I just believe it, and that's the way this works. So I had some grapevine cuttings, and I think there were some pomegranate cuttings as well. And I decided to just stick them in the ground. One of the things I'm doing right now is I'm taking like types of plants, cuttings, and then sticking them next to plants of the same species that are already rooted. And so these grapevines I stuck in with the grapevine that's growing on the hillside. My rationale for that being, and I don't know if this actually holds any water, but my rationale for that being that the microbial life that the roots of those grape cuttings, or the non-existent roots of those grape cuttings, like the microbial life that they'll need, exists in that soil with the homestead grapevine that's here. And so hopefully there's like some level of support and symbiosis there. I don't know, again, if that's actually a thing, but I put it out there for that reason. The other thing that I did with all of these cuttings, because I couldn't find my, my wrapping tape at the time, my parafilm, is that I dipped them in beeswax instead. I don't know how that's going to work out. I kind of see beeswax as being like semi-flexible. It was very thin. And then also I figured it would melt once it got hot enough, and that'd probably be about the time that the leaves would come out. But I also figured that it would keep them from drying out. So I don't know if I've sealed off their cuticle completely and they're going to die, but again, it's cuttings. They were free. It's an experiment. We'll see what happens. So let's see, what else is on this list? Okay, so the garlic that I planted along these stumps now, it's finally getting some water because we've had rain all week, which is great. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how that progresses as well. There's, I think like 2 or 3 dozen bulbs out there now. And so it's not massive garlic like I've grown, in pure compost and amended rows at a farm before. But it is garlic, and it is sort of in a perennial planting, and those tend to be a little bit more, at least in my experience, disease resistant than cultivated plantings because you have all of the microorganisms in the soil there working in your favor. So very excited about the garlic, and hopefully, that adds a little bit of seasoning. One of the things that I skipped, where was it? Oh, so in the edible bed, we'll go back a little bit. There's the just like edible greens bed that I planted the cucumbers in. They're also sharing a trellis with some peas. Again, I never know what's going to work out, and I find it a lot easier to pull something than to try and add something in at the last minute. So I just kind of plant everything at like high density, and then whatever's the healthiest survives, and other things get picked out and eaten as we go. But in this edible bed, this is something, if you're a new gardener, this is a fun thing to play with and try at home. So you'll see that there's like these beautiful heads of lettuce, and then like a little thing of celery, and then like weird little onion sprouts, and like all of these things I got at the grocery store. And so that was living roots lettuce, probably hydroponic to be honest, but it still has the roots attached. And so I pulled off the leaves I needed. There was still a tiny heart in the middle that was maybe like 1.5 to 2 inches across, and I just planted that right in the soil. And so I do that with lettuce, I do that with celery. I mean, once you get down to the heart again, I leave a couple of sprigs of whatever I'm planting so that it can photosynthesize. But just getting, the base end down in the soil or the roots down in the soil, same with onions, garlic, leeks. There's a lot of things that you can grow additional harvest from. It's not going to be, massive as like planting the seed and waiting the amount of time, but those were planted less than a month ago, and I have a whole head of lettuce again. So if you're trying to like look forward and figure out what you can do now while you're waiting for seeds to germinate, like these are things just to keep in mind. I've watched those videos, I don't want to like name names because I don't know, but there's like the 30-second, how to do all of these gardening thing videos. Don't bother with carrots unless you really like eating the greens. Well, like if you're just planting or watering the carrot top, like I think that's a waste of time. If you find that to be fascinating, you do you. But like there are some things where at least think through the process and decide for yourself if it's worth, growing as a food crop or if it's just a fun experiment. The figs that I have propagated are starting to leaf out a little. It's going to be interesting moving a few of those. So everything that I've planted, I have duplicates of, which is very exciting. Initially, I was like, I don't know why I have so many of everything, but things die and whatever. But now I sort of know why. It's because I need to leave half of it here and take half on the road. So the figs are doing well. I'm going to jump to a question that I got about how long it takes cuttings to get rooted. So my best results have been figs, and I think that that's probably like the easiest place to start. They're really productive trees. It gets you into more of like a perennial mindset. And the only thing I can tell you about how long they take to get rooted, one, you don't want to do it in a super cold space. Right now, my my propagation box that's sitting outside has been probably like, I'd say high 40s, low 50s, day and night, maybe 60s. Like, it's been chilly, and we've had some sunny days, but for the most part, it's rather chilly. And so they're going to be slower if it's cold. If you're looking at like 40s and 50s, you're probably not going to see roots, and you might actually get molds before you get roots. You really need them to be in a space that's like 60s at the lowest. 70s is kind of the sweet spot. When we crawl into the 80s, again, we're looking at fungus and stuff. We get to the high 80s. This is all Fahrenheit, by the way. Sorry, international friends. I'm sure someone can put a translation for all of that down below in the comments somewhere. But yeah, like kind of in that 70 to 80 degree range is where I've seen the fastest root development. So on a windowsill inside, a lot of times is your best bet. Again, my figs are not wrapped this year, but I'll show you a couple of examples. Because they're in a container that has humidity, they're not wrapped. But typically, if they were going to be sitting out on a counter or windowsill, then I would wrap the top in like a saran wrap or parafilm or some sort of plastic wrap, old grocery bag, whatever, just to kind of keep the humidity on the cutting itself. But so like these guys are the same age of cutting, and you can see that there's some green on this one. There's some leafing out that's like beginning to happen on this one, and then this guy has nothing yet. But that doesn't mean that this guy's not working. It just means that he's not pushing out any leaves yet. So I've found sometimes it takes 3 weeks, sometimes it takes 3 months. It really depends on your conditions. And that's for like a strong root system. That's not 3 months to grow a root. If you don't have any roots in like a month and a half or 2 months, your cutting probably didn't take. The other problem that you could have there is that you just use too big of a cutting. You really want, with the exception of, well, even with figs, to be honest, like you really want something that's like pencil size. I'll do like Sharpie marker size, but like I wouldn't go much bigger than that because it'll take a lot longer to get rooted and it's kind of frustrating and you can run into more problems. And I wouldn't go much smaller than that either because it dries out quickly. So that's just a note on fig cuttings. Getting back to the garden, I also yesterday, I decided that I was going to run around planting things like a crazy person because I still had a lot of experiments that I wanted to get in the ground. And so my neighbor and I ran around. We planted the wild native prunus varieties that I got. And again, another experiment that I don't know is going to work or not. But I grafted some domesticated prunus to them. So they have, plums and apricots, and I don't think I put any nectarines. I think it's just plums and apricots on these two. But one is a beach plum, would be like the common name. It's like a California beach plum. The other I want to say is a choke cherry. So we'll see how this do. I have no expectations, but I wanted to try because I had the cuttings to play with. The spiral garden, again, is starting to fill in nicely. It has so much arugula, so I don't expect anyone here to get scurvy anytime soon, which is great, or gout, which is also great. And that has a little bit of my favorite lettuce popping up. So there's one called, it's like flashy trout or speckled trout. It's a romaine type. It's one of the sweetest ones I found. And it goes into all my mixes. And so I'm happy those are popping up. I hope that they let a few things go to seed because I've been saving these to be more drought tolerant for a long time now. So we'll see how that works out. Someone actually mentioned to me that that spiral, since it's on flat ground, might actually be working as like a swale and helping to bank water into the soil parts, like the mulch part helping to bank water. So that's exciting. I didn't even think about that. I just did a spiral because it felt right. But I can see how that would be working because the green in that is just, it's so much bigger than like everywhere else. The greenhouse tent is working out really well. That's just the plastic. It is painter's plastic sheeting that I have draped over a like, what's it, support beam on the deck, and then put my plants under it and just kind of like batten the hatches down with some tape and rocks. And so if you don't have a greenhouse, if you don't have space inside, but you got a little corner outside where you can, you know, do your transplants, then I highly recommend, you know, just going and finding some plastic, sheeting. I mean, you could tape grocery bags together, like just something to kind of give them a little bit more coverage, give your plants more coverage, but also be able to pot them up and move them out. Now, I had someone ask me if it made that big of a difference to pot things up. I'm going to close this window because the rain is just like starting to come in. But they asked me, they're like, does it really make that big of a difference? If I have, you know, a month before I need a plant, should I bother potting something up, or should I just wait and plant it deeper? They were talking about tomatoes, but I want to kind of cover this and give you a visual for this so you know, as you're thinking about it, and if you have the time and you have the space for a larger pot, this might be in your better interest. So the first one I'm going to show you is these Calabrian chilies, and they all were planted at the same time. And I think that that's kind of the important way to show this, right? I was hoping that I'd have enough of the same variety. And so this one's still in a 4-inch pot. You can see he's gotten a little bit leggy. I don't think this got pruned. And this one did get pruned, so it might not be like the best, you know, apples to apples example, but it's pretty close. But one of the things that you'll notice here is that, and it's 2 plants in a pot, so yeah, it's not apples to apples at all. But you'll notice that the stems are a little bit more narrow, the color is a little more yellow. I would probably hedge a bet, and I'm going to pull it out right now to see, but I'm guessing that the roots are starting to wrap a little based on just the sort of physiology, like the visuals. I'm starting to see like some pre-flower buds happening here, and I don't think that it's happy in this pot, so it's starting to stress. If you see buds happening in this small of a pot. Oh, and the roots don't actually look too bad. So, but you can see there's like pretty ample root development that's happening. But I think probably more in the center, they're starting to compete, and that's part of the problem. The bigger thing for me is that, like with this guy, you can see the stem is a little bit thicker. It's getting new growth at a lower point. The green is a little better. The leaves are a little larger. And so I just think that from a health perspective, when it comes to potting your plants up, like if they get to this point and you have a spot that is indoors that's big enough, or outdoors even better that's big enough that you can build a little tent, that potting up is definitely worth it, because this guy's going to go out and he's going to be ready to go. And this guy is going to take a little bit of time for recovery. I'll show you another Calabrian. This was in my window pots, and with the window pots, I really recommend doing either vegetables that stay small or like herbs and that sort of stuff. I mean, you can play with it a little, but I do find that this is a very small amount of soil for a lot of vegetables to live their entire life cycle out. But this is another Calabrian as well. As you can see, sort of leggy. This one did not get pruned either, but it's starting to do kind of a similar thing to this other 4-inch pot, and it's starting to put some flower buds on, and I have a feeling that, yeah, there's a little bit of root. I don't think you can see it. There's a little bit of root that's popping out in the bottom. So, yeah, I just like to, that's the other thing that I've noticed is, like, if a plant is getting kind of leggy, especially peppers, if you pot them up and you have a little safe spot to stick them outside that's not freezing cold, then they usually start to kind of bush out and take up the space. Along those lines, before we jump to tomatoes, someone was asking me, or I've had a few people ask me, what the smallest size pot I would grow a pepper in for the entire season. And this is a gallon, and I honestly think a gallon's too small. There are things you can do to kind of coax, you know, plant through, or a fruiting plant through the entire season in terms of, you know, feeding and whatnot. Or I guess, yeah, we'll call it feeding for now. But I just don't think that it's super kind to the plant to have it live in a gallon its entire life when it does so much better in like a 5-gallon or 10-gallon or 15. But the smallest that I would go for a full season, depending on fruit size. If it's a smaller fruit size, I might do a 2 or 3 gallon. Again, that may cause you some trouble, especially in the summer if it dries out too much. For the larger fruiting, like bell peppers and whatnot, I am not comfortable doing it in less than a 5 gallon. So most of my stuff goes in the ground or in raised beds, and I don't mess with pots too much just because I've lived in hot climates for so long that they tend to dry out, or they tend to, get soggy at the bottom, or there's a number of things that'll happen. I just don't always have great success. I do know people who are professional pepper growers, though, that do them in, buckets and containers. And I don't think that any of them actually go smaller than a 5 gallon either. I feel like most of them push to 10. So I'd say whatever size you have space for, but if all you have space for are 1 gallons, then keep it to a smaller fruiting size. And know that your production's probably not going to be as high as if you were able to put it in a larger pot where the roots have more space, which means more access to resources. Now, jumping over to tomatoes, going back to this, is potting up worth it? So this is a pomodoro. This is an Italian seed that I'd saved. And this is also one that was planted at the same time as those peppers. I want to say like late December, early January, somewhere around there. As you can see, he's looking kind of spindly. He's getting a little leggy. I just left him in here, to be honest, to show you guys this difference. And then I'm trying to see... Oh, so these, I didn't have any more pomodoros in the larger pots. I thought that I had, it was like pomodoros and pastes, but I apparently potted up both pastes instead of one paste and one pomodoro. So anyway, this was about the same visual as this guy. Like a week or two ago. I think it's been like 2 weeks ago. And as you can see, like I wasn't able to bury the stems quite deep enough in this gallon. This one I did a little bit better job of burying it. But you can see again, it's like the spread of the leaves are better, the leaves are larger, the stems are better and larger, they look healthier. You can tell that there's some like root development that's starting to happen, this adventitious roots all along these stems that are starting to pop out, all these bumps that you see. Those are actually forming roots underground. And so with this soil volume versus this soil volume, I mean, it's not difficult to know why, this one looks better. It has more soil to work with. And so again, if you have, 3 or 4 weeks left until you can plant out, if you have space to put even a gallon size container, even quart size containers, really, anything to get a plant that looks like this out of a 4-inch pot, I say go for it. It's going to actually give you a better jump start on your entire season. So I strongly recommend potting up whenever possible, unless it can go on the ground, and then put it in the ground. But I think most of us are still a little too cold. We're probably all, I think the earliest ones are still a month away, or in the neighborhood of maybe at least 2 to 3 weeks. And I really do think that 2 to 3 weeks even makes a difference on these guys. Because, that was, like I said, this was 2 weeks ago, So 2 weeks ago, this looked like this. I think these actually looked a little bit worse, to be honest. But now they're looking pretty strong and healthy. And I even see a few flower buds forming. So that's very exciting. The other thing, okay, so this was, and then I'll close it out. And then we'll there's a few questions I got to do a little bit of searching on, just to make sure we're going in the right direction. But one other thing, this was the flat that I planted last week, you guys. And so I did not take the lid off early enough this morning. These were not popped yesterday, and they are today. But you'll see these are some beets that we're going to have to do some picking out and transplanting. It's not my favorite thing to transplant, to be honest, but I wanted to get them started, and I wanted to get a variety of things started just to demonstrate various stuff. These are, I'm trying not to pop my little clothespins off. They're labeling. There's some watermelons in here. A little early for those guys, but again, this is why I'm always like, don't plant, do as I say, not as I do, right? I'm like, don't plant seeds that need an inch depth of planting space into a 1-inch 6-pack. That's why. That little root that's sticking out. So those guys are hungry and looking for more, and they're going to have to wait a minute. These are some other squash. This really massive pumpkin that I got seeds for. And I'm very excited about those because I think that they're more than likely mildew resistant. I picked those up in Puerto Rico at a farmer's market. and was just like super, super stoked, great flavor, huge pumpkin, something that could feed a village. Like that's the sort of crops that we're looking for right now. So I'm excited about that. This is a silly project that I'm not sure how I'm going to move forward. That's rice, if you can see that tag. It's a rice that doesn't need apparently to sit in water. So we'll see how that goes. And then as you can see though, there's a couple of cells in here, and this is why I cut my 6-packs apart, right? Is that there's a couple of cells in here, let me pull this guy out, that have no germination at all yet. And so that's why I do it this way, so that I can pull the things out that need light, like these melons and squash that have sprouted, and I can leave the things in that still need humidity, like these onions. And that way you can sort of regulate it, you know, all in 1 or 2 trays, and not have this big tray of like half germinated things that then either you pull out and give it light and everything else dries out in the process, or you don't give it light soon enough and then you have all these like really sad or damped off seedlings. And damping off is just sort of a fancy phrase for succumbing to mildew from too much humidity. And so that's pretty much what's going on. If you noticed, and this is a conversation that will be ongoing because this is a controversial opinion that I've decided that I'm going to die on that hill apparently. But if you've noticed in some of these seed packs, you'll see that same sort of white fuzz that you see in the Bokashi compost. And that's because I put the Bokashi bran in my seedling mix. So I have I don't think it's a crazy theory, but it's like in there, you know, that rather than working with a sterilized soil medium, I prefer to work with a highly active, really alive soil medium. And since I haven't been able to access the ones that I want to play with, I've been kind of, you know, mixing up my own concoction. And so it has the Bokashi bran. It has that root starter food that I've been playing with as well, that supposedly has bacteria and fungi and whatnot in it. And then a compost, like a really organic, certified organic compost blend. That is, you know, all different natural products that will feed your plants, but having that combination of microbes between the things that I'm adding and that soil plus the seed starting medium, I see the soil just like really come alive with all of these various fuzzes and growths initially, and then the seeds pop up, and then sometimes it's still around, you know, eating the seed coatings, or sometimes if I've used like a toothpick, it'll eat the toothpick. Basically anything that's in there. But the thought process anyway on all of this is that if you have a abundance of beneficial bacteria and beneficial fungi, beneficial microbes, then there's no place for the pathogens to go. So when you're starting in a really sterile medium, unless you're able to completely sterilize absolutely everything in your space, which is not possible, like there's yeast floating everywhere, that's how we make sourdough, right? It's just catching it out of the air. But so you're not able to like fully sterilize the space that you're working in. And I'm sure there's big growers out there that are like, no, I do it this way. But I'm talking about a home gardener in a home with a door opening and closing on a regular basis. Like there's all sorts of things you can't see that fly in and out. And if you start to see it in a really sterile medium, what I've found to happen is whatever's flying around in the air sees a really nice landing pad with a food source, right? And so it has like a place to sleep, and then once that seed pops up, it also has something to eat, and it's just happy there, it's nice, and it's damp, and it's probably warm, and that's exactly what a lot of the pathogens like. So I like to make sure that all of the real estate is full before the seeds pop up. And the one thing I've noticed this year, all jokes aside, like the one thing I've noticed this year in doing this is I've had zero damping off. I know correlation is not causation, and I need to test it further, but I'm very happy with the results so far. So if you're having trouble with sterile potting mediums, if you're having trouble, you know, boiling or baking it or whatever, maybe look into some biology because it's definitely seems to be helping my plants, and that's sort of the answer that I'm coming to after more than a decade really of doing the research in this space, is that, you know, working on improving the soil biology that we're working with from right from the get-go all the way down to harvest and beyond and down to composting, like that is going to be, you know, what keeps this wheel spinning. It's not going to be some chemical or box or bag that we get. And I do think that they sterilize or offer sterile medium so that you have to add food You know, I think that that's part of like the built-in process at this point is, well, if there's nothing for the plant to eat when it wakes up, then you have to figure out the food source immediately, and then you reach for, you know, your synthetic nitrogen fertilizer, and then it's all downhill from there because you're just getting salt buildup. You're killing any microorganisms in that space with that salt buildup. So I just decided to, you know, skip all of those problems and start with a living soil, or as close to living soil as I can build without, you know, having a fully ready compost pile right now. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with the results. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Oh, so one more thing, and then we're going to close this out because I didn't realize how long it was until just now, and I'm really sorry. I'll put something in the like description to kind of break down what we're talking about where, maybe. I don't know. We'll see. But one of the questions I've gotten from a fair amount of students, and I love this, is if there's a direction of research to go in for a research paper when it comes to regenerative agriculture, you know, soil science and all of this sort of stuff. I highly recommend looking into Elaine Ingham's Soil Food Web. I think that the way that there's like definitely a really big, dense paper that I haven't even finished, to be honest, but there's various videos on YouTube and just a lot of information out there. Even if you just Google Soil Food Web, I feel like there's a lot of us talking about it right now, but definitely digging into that, like really driving that home, talking about, you know, soil life and the biology that exists. I just picked up a book at the thrift store the other day that was written in 1977. It was published by the Sierra Club. I don't remember what it's called, and it's already packed in my car, but it's something about gardening. It's like Beginner's Guide to Gardening or something, just to see what they were offering. And they were talking about soil microbes in 1977 and how we just didn't know enough about them, but we knew they were important. And then somehow we jumped from that to where we're at now. And all of this stuff happened in between, right? As far as on individual level gardening, this was, you know, post when it started happening commercially at scale, and now it started happening more at like a household level when they were introducing, you know, any petrochemical based like fertilizers and whatnot. And yeah, now we're back around to being able to identify the biology, being able to manipulate the biology and produce a lot healthier, happier plants with a lot less work and a lot less additions that don't belong in the soil. So if you're looking to do research in this space, definitely dig into Soil Food Web. Dig into microbiology, read the Teeming with Microbes and Teeming with Mycorrhizae and those collection of books. Those are really dense, but lots of good information. And just kind of poke around that space, because once you go down the soil food web rabbit hole, then there's just a lot of doors that open. So we're going to end it there today so that this doesn't go for 40 minutes. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. I will do my best to answer them. If I get repetitive questions or I see a lot of likes on something, know that I will be including that in an upcoming video, and we'll try to like move down the line as far as making these a little bit more individually focused, but also just sort of these catch-up ones where it's like, let's, you know, just talk about what's going on in general. So yeah, leave your questions and comments in the comments below. If you like what you see, hit that subscribe button, ding that bell, follow me on Instagram at FlavorKit, and until next time, happy gardening.